is Taj of the Beat.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by
Manuel, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher. I teach in the Los Angeles area. This has been my 16th year in the classroom, and this, of course, is All the Above, your home for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to the world of education. If you are watching us on YouTube, if you like what you're seeing, go ahead and hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're listening to the podcast on the go, do consider rating us and reviewing us when you have a chance so that we can pop up in more people's feeds and algorithms and all that stuff. All right, we really appreciate you joining us. Jeff, man, it's been over 2 months now, right, of this COVID shutdown situation. We haven't been in the actual studio since March.
It's funny to hear you say 2 months because I'm over here like, you know, what time is it? What day of the week is it? I feel like every day is kind of, you know, just blurring into the next. But yeah, it has been over 2 months now, I think, and or just about 2 months. And yeah, it is. It's a fascinating collective sociological experiment we are undertaking together here, and you know, we're doing okay. The show is continuing, and I think in a lot of ways it's actually you know, it's leveled the playing field, right? So what we're doing is what everybody's doing, and it's allowing us to you know, perhaps you know, elevate our game in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. But I do miss the studio. I miss the student helpers. I miss all the fancy tech that we would just look at and not really use because it was above our like understanding of how to even get it going. But you know what I'm saying? We're going to keep the show rolling and continue to do so. Jeff, what's on the agenda for today's episode?
Well, Manuel, as always, we got a good one for everybody. And today we have a really special guest who's going to be joining us. And, you know, we have in recent episodes been talking about this issue of diversity in the teacher workforce, which has all kinds of sort of, you know, HR implications, right? And this being kind of late spring and approaching the end of the school year here in California, and, you know, maybe a little bit past the end of the school year in some other parts of the country. But it is a critical time in schools for us to be hiring. And in general, this would be that time of year when, like, you know, hiring of teachers is in full gear and districts are issuing, you know, thousands and thousands of contracts across the country to new hire teachers, to folks who are new to the profession, all of that. And so with that kind of context in mind, we wanted to bring on a guest who could help us unpack some really fascinating questions about the pipeline for teachers, right? Teacher training programs across the country, and how the kind of evolving landscape of our profession impacts teacher training. So we've got Emma Hipolito, who is the director of the teacher education program at UCLA, which, Manuel, I'm not sure, are you familiar with?
What school was that? You said, wait, what was the name of it?
I know, I said it quickly. It's the University of California at Los Angeles.
Oh.
Are you familiar with that?
I think if you are talking about the one that happens to be the #1 public university in the world, Jeff, then yes, of course I'm familiar with that one.
Okay, yes. I just wanted to double check because, you know, sometimes you might miss something, you know.
No, you're right.
Perhaps I just want to make sure you were informed. That's all. So we've got Emma. Emma Hipolito is the director of the teacher education program at UCLA, and someone with just a wealth of experience about teacher education and teacher training to help us kind of explore this topic today. So it's going to be good. You definitely don't want to miss it.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to that conversation, Jeff, especially in the context of these pending budget cuts that are coming our way. You know, this is obviously a very traumatic year for the country, for the world, really, in so many ways. And in California, our budget, we had a bit of a surplus for a while. We had, I don't remember the exact number, but we had billions in reserve for a rainy day. And that's basically been wiped out by this coronavirus impact on our economy. And I know that there's a lot of concern out there about what these budget cuts might do to schools. And I think that's something that we might want to talk about a little bit right now before we get into the seminar with Emma, because this is something that, yes, it is hiring season, and yes, it is the time where folks are completing their teacher ed programs and ready to transition into a full-time classroom of their own. But there's also like just that fear that there's not going to be really that much time before we start hitting those heavy layoffs that we experienced during the Great Recession. So I don't know. I wonder what your thoughts are about that, Jeff. Just this idea of, yeah, it's hiring season and yeah, folks are finishing the programs, but all the discussion lately has been about how these budget cuts are going to severely impact schools everywhere, and California specifically.
Yeah, man. Well, I tell you, I'm deeply worried right now, and not just in the sense that all of us should be worried about the lasting effects of the coronavirus, but even at this point in the equation, right? So like just with the effects that we've suffered so far and what we know so far, the governor of California just recently during the second week of May made an announcement that the state is projecting an $18 billion budget shortfall for schools, K-12 schools and community colleges. Now, this is, depending upon the calculations you look at, let's just sort of roughly approximate it as somewhere around like a 10% budget cut for education in California, right? Now, that's pretty alarming news when we think about what the impact would be on your local neighborhood school and your kid's school, right? If that school were to suffer something approximating a 10% budget cut, right? And so we're talking definitely about layoffs of staff. We're talking about cuts to programs. Those could be the programs that your kid loves. Your kid loves being on the badminton team, right? Well, the badminton team costs money, right? That could manifest in things like shortening school years in certain districts, cutbacks on transportation, cutbacks on investments in curriculum and materials that impact classroom instruction. So this is a massive issue, not to mention the fact that school districts in a lot of counties and cities and municipalities across this state and across the country are also some of the largest and most stable employers, right? So if we're talking about cutbacks in not only teachers, but also staff, classified staff and folks who work in district offices as well. So we're talking about a potentially like cascading negative economic impact here that is going to have a really unfortunate, if it plays out this way, ripple effect on kids' experience. And of course, this is happening at the same time as we have our very governor, floating the ideas of like, we should extend the school year and start in July and, sort of make things, trying to make up for the fact that we had essentially a truncated school year this year in a lot of ways. And so there's still a lot to be worked out. There's the, pie in the sky, perhaps, or, maybe more unlikely than likely possibility that the federal government comes to the rescue with funds more similar to what happened during the Great Recession back in 2008. But Manuel, this is no joke, right? Like this is a huge issue, and I know you've had some personal experience with with dealing with this kind of thing before as well.
Yeah, for sure. So during the Great Recession, that just so happened to be the time when I shifted districts. So when I moved from Sacramento down to Pasadena, and that put me on the bottom of the list in terms of seniority. And my first 3 years working in my current district, I was laid off. That first year, I was saved by the Obama stimulus package. I don't remember the technical term for it, but I do remember specifically packing up my classroom at the end of the year with the understanding that, like, I'm basically done here. And then there was a board meeting and there was a decision made on what to do with those stimulus funds. And they used those funds to save a number of teachers that first year. In the second year, I was pink slipped again. no stimulus funds that year that were available to help me out that time. And it came down to creative master scheduling. I specifically remember myself and another social science teacher, and we were basically, instead of us each being laid off, we were shifted to, instead of just being social science teachers, we also did other things. So it was like I did a few periods of history, but then I was also activities director and also did Avid. So I became sort of a hybrid type of teaching position, and he had something similar. So it was like creative master scheduling to try to keep us there. In the third year, it wasn't any of that, and it was deep into the summer before a position opened up. I don't remember if it was that somebody retired or what, but when my spot opened back up and I was able to stay. So that was 3 years in a row where basically the end of the year I was packing up without any knowledge of whether or not I would ever step back into that classroom. And that's just really, I mean, I have some seniority now, so that I'm not concerned about myself specifically in that regard, at least, if it were to play out the exact same way that it played out during the Great Recession. But I'm concerned about so many of our best and brightest who don't have the seniority. I mean, that was a terrible, terrible feeling, a terrible, terrible experience, and I wouldn't wish that upon anybody, especially those who are entering the profession, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to make change. And being hit with layoff after layoff is something that I endured, but a lot of people didn't. A lot of people just took that as the sign that maybe teaching just wasn't for them. So we lost a lot of people because of that. So I'm worried, man. I'm worried.
Yeah, I think what you just named actually is a topic that I would love for us to explore on an upcoming episode at some point here, because as I think many people know, right, the way that collective bargaining agreements in the vast majority of situations, at least across the country, in teaching are structured is with a seniority-based layoff system, right? And so there's essentially the concept of last in, first out, right? And as a former administrator, the prospect, right, of looking at your staff and seeing layoffs come and knowing that your newest teachers are the people who have to go, whether those are some of your strongest teachers or whether, they're not, right? And then the same for your more veteran staff, right? Like knowing that you have to keep them, whether they're your strongest teachers or whether they're some of your weakest teachers, is so deeply frustrating and demoralizing. And a structure that I think, especially with the instability we see in our economy now, where twice in essentially a decade or so span of time, we see these crumbling, great recessions, depression type of events, really sets our profession on sort of a horrible trajectory of like losing its new talent, right? And then sort of slamming the door in the face of the next generation of folks at the very time when we have a shortage, right? And so I think that would be an interesting topic for us to explore, full of controversy and politics. But those are the topics I like. So
yeah, I mean, there's a lot to explore there because now obviously I've been in the game long enough that I'm not on the bottom of the seniority list, but at the same time, I don't trust schools and administrators and districts to have the freedom to sort of pick and choose who gets laid off and who doesn't. So I'm not a fan of the seniority-based layoffs at all. I'm also not a fan of having just the freedom at the district level or the school site level to decide who gets laid off and who doesn't, because anybody that's worked in a school system knows that there's just a lot of politics within. And although I trust my current administrators and my school site has been great where I'm at right now, but I know plenty of other school sites where it's not that, and it's definitely favorites, and it's definitely some real problematic power dynamics between administration and teachers. And I would hate for someone just to have the freedom to take layoffs as the opportunity to move out some of the maybe more challenging voices who push back against certain policies and practices. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack there. And in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to be dealing with this at all. But it's not a perfect world. It's far from it. And who knows what the future
What is this
looks like.
perfect world that you speak of, Dr. Rustin? I'm unfamiliar with this concept.
Yeah, exactly right. And plus the added layer of coronavirus. I mean, this is a time where, if anything, we need more staff members than ever before if we're going to, try to reduce the number of students per teacher because of social distancing and all that. Like if I'm supposed to have a much smaller set of students in front of me so that we could spread out, there's going to take more staff to do that unless you're going to have just a really, really creative type of school year schedule that, just extends and extends, and that same teacher has like 10 kids at a time, but like for the whole year or whatever. Like it's a mess, Jeff.
But
we're going to sort it out.
Nightmare. Yes, we will. We are going to do something. Right? Like August and September are coming.
Indeed.
And school's going to happen. So districts are working hard on it, and it's a ridiculous puzzle to figure out, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right, Jeff. So let's just at least think about those teachers who are entering the profession, and budget cuts and economic distress aside, let's learn a little bit about how they are entering the profession in terms of mindset and preparedness and the impact of this COVID-19 spring that we have had. So let's go ahead and jump to the seminar and have that discussion with the director of UCLA's teacher education program. Stay tuned.
All right, folks, welcome to today's seminar. We are very excited to welcome to the show a new guest and someone that Manuel and I have both admired for some time now. She is Emma Hipolito, director of the teacher education program at UCLA. And Manuel is vaguely familiar with UCLA. And,
I do believe I've heard of that #1 public university in the world, Jeff. I do believe I am familiar with that.
Slightly familiar with UCLA. And we're so excited to have Emma to help us unpack this just interesting topic. As we're kind of at, in many ways, the peak and most urgent time of the teacher hiring season, what better time to talk about issues in the teacher pipeline, how we're preparing the next generation of teachers, and how teacher education programs are evolving to kind of meet the demands of the time. So Emma, welcome to All of the Above.
Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to engage in this conversation with you all. And you're right, this is a really good time for this conversation.
Yeah. So Emma Hipolito is the director of the teacher education program at UCLA. Her area of specialization is history and social science instruction and teacher preparation and development. Prior to joining the teacher education program, she served as the director of the UCLA History Geography Project, a site of the California History Social Science Project. Dr. Hipolito has many years' experience as an educator, a leader of professional development, and a teacher educator. She has developed and directed several state and federally funded programs for teachers. Welcome, Emma. Manuel, take it away.
So thank you, Emma, for taking the time to sit with us today. We know it's a hectic time of year, this being the end or towards the end of the academic year, plus with obviously the biggest ongoing headline right now, the coronavirus crisis and its impact on education. We figured we'd start there and ask, how have the COVID-19 shutdowns impacted your teacher ed candidates?
Yeah, so lots of changes for us. I think the biggest change was remote learning for UCLA in general, one of the biggest ones. All our classes have been in person, and so the shift for our instructors, and so actually that was my initial work, was to make sure all of our instructors could get online and support our students. Then the other piece has been with school closures. Students were working in schools, we're supporting teachers, we're student teaching. And student teaching looks very different remotely than it does when you're there. And so, for each student, it looks a little bit different. For some, it's taken a little bit longer to be able to facilitate some work online, in particular our elementary students. But our secondaries, our students who are going to be secondary teachers, they were off and running almost right away, right? So I think that's been the biggest change, because each situation, each school is in a different place. And so trying to support our students to begin remote instruction, but also to support the socio-emotional needs of their students. Because we know, we know the pandemic has caused a lot of turmoil for families, and so what could we do so that our students are equipped to do that work? So all those shifts have been happening, and major shifts in policy around credentialing of teachers. So trying to get a hold of all of that has been an endeavor, but we're moving along.
I'm actually curious about the credentialing part of it, because I've had student teachers, not from UCLA though, because my district, our student teachers tend to come from USC or Cal State LA. But when I've had them, I've always had to sign off their sheets for like their hours, their observation hours, to meet whatever requirements they had. So I'm not sure how that might apply to UCLA's program, but in terms of that student teacher like needing to get a certain amount of hours of observation or teaching or whatever by a certain date and deadline, has any of that discussion been sorted out yet?
Yes, all of that. Well, I can't say that. Well, we have a lot more clarity at this point. Early on, so it's the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing that credentials teachers, and early on they told us there has to be flexibility, right? Prior for us, online didn't count for their hours, right?
Right.
Teacher candidates are expected to complete 600 hours of clinical practice, and for us, all of that meant what they were doing in their placement, and in person, and the commission came back quickly with guidance that said online instruction can count. The time that you spend planning that instruction for some of our students who will be elementary teachers, online instruction wasn't even a possibility because the kids didn't have devices, and so putting together materials that families could pick up, that work that you did with the guiding teacher, all of that counted. So all of that has been a major shift. They also said the work they do with us, as experienced educators, that those hours counted as well. In the past, we really had not counted that time. I'll give you an example. Our elementary candidates take, oh gosh, I can't even tell you the number of methods classes, right? Because they need to be able to teach everything. So art, math, writing, literacy, social studies, that's what I teach, science, all of that work that involved looking at student work, planning, so forth, those hours counted. So that was a major shift from the commission and a way to support teacher candidates. I could get into the weeds a little and say that one of the ways that teachers are, another aspect of credentialing requirements is the teacher performance assessment, TPA, and students have to film themselves. There's two TPAs, have to film themselves teaching and write up the work that they're doing, write up their lesson plans. That has not changed. We were lucky in some respects that our students needed to have, our rule is that it had to be turned in by March 20th, which meant that we had to have done a lot of the filming ahead of time. So that put us in a better, some of us, not all of us, my music students do 2 rounds of filming and they're in a different situation. But even then, the commission has said that if you're teaching online, and can grab some of that video, that you can submit that as well. It's tricky, right? Our students weren't taught to teach online. They were taught to teach in person. And so trying to make that transition for that group of students has been a hurdle. But we're confident. I just had a meeting with their advisors. We're confident that some of those students will be able to get a traditional credential. So I hope that is a lot.
No, I mean, I didn't know any of that. I was wondering how the teacher candidates, those who, in my memory, I remember scrambling for hours and trying to make sure it all adds up. I was wondering how that was being dealt with. So yeah, that was very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, Emma, I can certainly on a personal level relate a little bit to the struggle that you were just mentioning with teachers being taught to teach in the physical sense and then having to adjust to online instruction. As someone who teaches or facilitates learning amongst adults, ran my first of our monthly meetings with principals, professional development meetings with principals just recently and online. And it is a very different experience than than what I'm very used to and very comfortable with, and reading the room and adjusting things based on what you can physically experience when you're with the folks that you're teaching to. So I could certainly appreciate that. I'm wondering also, Emma, if you can share with us a little bit about sort of the impacts of this on teacher shortages, because California, like most states in the country, is in the midst of a serious and growing teacher shortage challenge in many ways. And I wonder if you can share some insights about what you see as kind of the root of that challenge, and also how COVID-19 and our response to it may affect our response to that shortage.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that I have research knowledge on the shortage other than what I read. I do think that, as I look at the work of schools, that schools are our last social safety net. And it's the one social safety net that works, right? And so it feels like a lot of times we put a lot on schools without providing our educators, our administrators, our leadership with all the resources that students need to really be an effective social safety net. And so I've been thinking about the work of community schools and wraparound services, right? That community schools have been building. And so that's a piece of it. I think that if we could really fund schools to do all the work that we ask them to do, that would go a long way, I think, to retaining educators. My other thought is, and I'm worried that this, in this sense, COVID will definitely impact this, is that we go through periods of economic instability. I'll say it that way. I'm thinking about the recession and the Great Recession, right? That's not that long or far away, but I can think about students who graduated from our program who I worked with, and they were laid off every year for 5 years, every year. And every year they got their jobs back. But the toll that takes, right? Every year in June, they're laid off. They would come back as long-term subs because they had a passion for the school. They were committed to their students. And then sometime in October, they were hired as the teacher again. But every year to be laid off, it took an incredible toll on that group. And I think that's 2007, 2008. I'm thinking that that's part of it. And I worry now, as they talk about the deficit, right? The governor has put out 2-year projected deficit, what that's going to mean for funding for schools. And I do think that is going to that's going to increase. If this job is not, if students put in all this work to learn to teach and don't know that a position is going to be available, or all the investment that they've made into a school to learn about a school, to learn about families, to learn about their students, that definitely takes a toll.
Yeah. Actually, we were talking about that at the top of this episode about our memories of the Great Recession. I myself was laid off 3 years in a row during that period, and that was a very heavy toll, and just the uncertainty about what next year will look like in terms of the potential of teacher layoffs and all of that. And then there's the separate economic concern, which is housing. So obviously your program is at the #1 public university in the world, situated in Los Angeles, and housing in Los Angeles has been incredibly expensive and beyond what many first year and second year teachers can afford. So we're wondering how the housing crisis and cost of living has perhaps impacted your program, and what your thoughts are around teacher compensation in light of the fact that so many teachers can't even afford to live in the city that they want to teach in.
Yes. Well, to me, there's no issue. We need to pay folks more, particularly for the amount of preparation that we're asking of them. That to me is not difficult to say, right? That's
Right.
just, we know that's true. I will say that what's been interesting for us is that, we really try to ground our work in specific communities and build student knowledge of that community, but build our own knowledge of those communities, not just, not just the history, but the current life of that community. And what we're observing is, point blank, I have a student that comes in I have two students that were driving in until COVID closures. We're driving in from Oxnard every day.
Yikes.
Wow.
Oxnard. I've got two in Oxnard, Palmdale, Santana. And they're doing it, I understand, right? They're doing it to save money, right? Because that way they don't go into deep debt. And so we try our very best to support them. And we know, right? We work in particular schools. We work in East Los Angeles. So, for the Santana people, well, they'll tell you it's worse to get to UCLA than they can get to East Los Angeles. But we're trying to put them together in small groups, cluster them in particular communities. But we had someone commuting from San Bernardino, right? And so all of that, I think, I just ran a panel for incoming students, and the student from Oxnard said, well, I wake up at 5:45 in the morning and I need to be out the door by 6:15 to be able to get to my school by 7:30. And has the same 2-hour commute, in the evenings. And so I think that all speaks to the fact that, one, student debt is very high as an undergraduate, and two, it's not affordable to move here. And so that, I know other cities that are very expensive, like San Francisco. And this is what they said. Again, we don't know what COVID will bring, but the city was working with the district to build housing that was more affordable for teachers. And so they were trying to build a substantial amount of housing to support teachers living in the community. I would love to, and I know LA has talked about it. I'm not sure where they are. It seemed like San Francisco had the money, and that's always the key, right? And so that's one of the things that I would love to see in Los Angeles, different ways that we can support teachers to live in the communities where they work.
Yeah, Emma, Manuel and I, many years ago, went to graduate school together and got our teacher credential together. And I think even though we've still got a little bit of youth on our side, we might now be officially qualified as old heads in the teacher space. And it's been a while since we have been in graduate school and have gone through our credentialing program. So for folks like us who may not remember it like it was yesterday, I'm curious to know, how have teacher education programs evolved in recent years, and what maybe are some of the kind of changes in approaches or experiences for the students that would be interesting for people to know about, that might not be obvious to even to educators, let alone the public.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of stuff, and I've been out for way longer than you two. I think one of the big changes is that it's sort of where we started. The big change is around what we call clinical practice, right? So what students do in classrooms. There has been a lot of new regulation, new policy around having students spend more time in schools, and that's the 600 hours that I referenced earlier. And along with that comes a model that UCLA was experimenting with through a program called Impact. For 10 years, we've been doing this, a residency model that has a teacher, a guide, a mentor teacher, a mentor, and a student teacher working together right at the beginning of the school year, and really being co-instructors. And so it's a different apprenticeship model. It's a lot of work for our mentors as well. But this residency model has built up traction, and with state funding, the California Commission for Credentialing has funded residency programs in the state. So we have a residency program with LA Unified. So this idea of residency, I mean, even if you think about the words, right, that you are deeply embedded in the work of the school, and early on as a brand new pre-service teacher. So that's one of the big changes, that move to residency. I also think that as I read and as I think about the work, so I will add that this is my third year directing the teacher education program at UCLA. I still see myself as a learner. And the other piece that I'm noting is the importance of that strong relationships with the schools where we place students. And so for a long time, UCLA has had this dream about like almost a hospital school, a residency school where we cluster groups of students, and that the teachers in those schools have a very close connection then to our program. As I think about some of the work that I've been doing with Ben Gertner and his deep knowledge, right? That's one of the things that we've talked about, that Ben Gertner, who's the principal at Roosevelt High School, that deep knowledge that he has of our program, that the teachers that work with our students have of our program, that's key to facilitating the growth of our pre-service students. And so I do think that that's one of the big changes, and this thinking around. I was rereading. It's called Community Teacher. I think it's Peter Morrell, who's the author, talking about those things. That what does it mean to really be in partnership with a school, for a teacher education program to work with the school and not just place one student, but really understand the work of that school, and that the school understand the work of the teacher education program. That those, I think, are two big shifts that we're working through right now.
Nice. Now, actually, we were going to ask you about sort of the ideal structure for a teacher ed program, because UCLA's has, for the length of my memory, always been 2 years, a 2-year program, and the program that Jeff and I went to were 1-year programs. And I know student teachers currently who are at universities where it's 1 year and that year is strictly online, like they never even meet with their professors in person. And then of course there's controversy or criticism of programs like Teach for America for being like a summer situation of getting your training before going into the school year. So it sounds like what you're describing here as far as the residency model and having that deep knowledge of the school and of the community and of the program sounds a lot more ideal. Why do you think the 1 year in and out type of models are so prolific?
Well, I think it's economics is part of it, right? And if we think about the first question you asked me about the shortage, right? Or I think second question, but the question about the shortage, if there's a shortage of teachers, then there's this need, right, to quickly produce, that's a terrible term, to quickly prepare people. And so that's part of it. TEP used to be a year. I went through the program. I went a year in the summer, and the summer was because I completed a master's degree and I have a bilingual credential. And it was, it was different. And again, the 600 hours were not present. I do think that for us, the decision was made to go to 2 years because we know that first year of teaching is so difficult, and we're trying to support teachers in their growth, and that we see that in all honesty, I mean, I think if I had my way, I could see 3, I could see 4 years. I could see a lot of different things, but in terms of what it would look like, to be able to prepare people to specialize in different areas where they may have interest, right? That's one of the things I've been trying to think about. Is, we have students who have deep interest in literacy. What would it mean to be able to give them some choice about some other things that they might take and still, complete the work that we are asking them to do that's going to prepare them to meet state requirements. I think the other thing that I think TP does well is have students really think about their own positionality, right? As we're entering different communities, and who are we as we enter community. And so all of that work takes a long time, and it's really, really hard to do. And I just feel the stress of the students trying to do that, right? And I think about our elementary candidates who, take 16 units more than our secondary candidates because they need to take methods in every course. But we have people who know how to teach art and know how to teach social studies. And so I think all of those things take time. So I don't know. I know the last time we were dreaming together with the faculty, they're like, imagine if we were 3 years, everything we could do. I don't think we could get students to stay 3 years, but it would be beautiful. And maybe, the idea for us is that we know how many people are lost to the field of education, right, in the first couple of years. And so that second year is really about creating practices that are going to sustain them, right? And so our cohort model, the network of teachers, those are about sustaining people in the profession.
Yeah, Emma, I'm so excited to hear you speak about that. And I, as someone who is perhaps a bit of a dreamer as well, and would wish for that 3-year preparation sequence for teachers, at some point maybe we'll have you back with like a union representative or something to kind of unpack that, because I see so much potential for sort of the growth and strengthening of the profession with the extension of preparation programs, and of course the financial incentives in place to make it not bury people financially to do so. But as someone who's worked in positions where I'm supporting administrators with instructional leadership and supporting teams of teachers and teacher leaders, seeing the number of folks who come into the profession not having had some foundational learning experiences around things like assessment literacy and around things like understanding reading development and how challenges in reading development manifest themselves with older students at the high school and middle school levels, right? And how to respond to those things instructionally. Like, these are huge things that we grapple with every day in the profession, and we continue to not give people at least enough learning experiences to equip them to be ready to respond when they start professionally, and how beautiful it would be if at scale we did that more effectively. So perhaps, Emma, a topic for your second appearance on All of the Above. But I'll shift gears slightly and say we've had a few conversations in recent episodes about diversity in the teacher workforce. And in a nutshell, it's an issue we're grappling with. Nationally, the teaching force is something like 70% white, but nationally, students in America's public schools are majority students of color. Here in LA, as in other larger urban areas across the country, we have lots of schools that are virtually 100% students of color. And so the mismatch of the demographics of the teacher force with the demographics of our students is very apparent. And I'm wondering, what are some ways in which your program at UCLA has taken on the challenge of helping to address issues of diversity in the teacher workforce?
I think it's important that when we talk about diversity that we think about it in maybe a more expansive way. So in TP, when we talk about diversity, we're talking ethnic and racial, of course, diversity, but also socioeconomic diversity, and also gender, right? And I think that latter one is an area of growth for us in particular. So as I said earlier, this is my third year in this position, and I've inherited a program that's thought deeply about this and that has worked really hard to ensure that the majority of our students are students of color. And so this year we're 81% students of color. And again, we need to think, so that doesn't look like other programs, in particular, at a UC or at a private school. But I think that, and I talk a lot to incoming students so that they get a sense of who we are, and to make sure that they really understand this is the work that we do. We don't just say this. And I think that they are very attracted to the mission, right? We talk about a social justice mission that works in community in solidarity with educators, with families, with communities to make change. And I think that that's very attractive to them. And that has helped us bring in a more diverse teacher pool. Also, I think that they're very attracted by the communities where we work. And some of them either grew up in those communities or similar communities, Fresno or Bakersfield. I'm thinking of the groups that I've been talking to that will come in September. Santana, Garden Grove, so areas that in a lot of ways mirror the communities where we work, and I think that matters. That calls to them. And I think that teacher education programs need to think about that, right? If we're only serving, if there's a lot of research around where teacher education programs place students and looking for the quote perfect placement. But to me, I'm not sure that the perfect placement exists necessarily, right? But rather we need to help our students see themselves in the schools where we work. And again, I inherited a program where students see that, right? That they see that the places where they work, that they're seeing other educators like them making change. So I think that's a big draw, and I think that other programs could do similarly. And I know the other piece is a pipeline, right? We're trying to build pipelines in different places as well. And sometimes we do get, I'm not going to tell you it's all the time, but it is that our alumni are part of that pipeline. And so sometimes it's their students who send us their students, right? With often an email saying, so-and-so was my student at Santee. So-and-so was I've gotten texts from teachers at West Adams, right? Saying, Emma, so-and-so applied. They were my students in AP US history. You want this person. So I'm like, great, right? But then also to me, the other piece is the pipeline from community colleges to a UC, right? And so that's one of the things we've been striving to build and work towards. And certainly we can continue to do more within our program. The other one is a little more complicated, but I would think that one of the things that has happened at UCLA is that we've decentered. I think our faculty would say they have decentered whiteness from the curriculum, and that we begin with the experiences of people of color. And we have these experiences, and that's the starting point. And other folks need to listen hard and understand that that's where we start. And I know that that's different from other programs.
Yeah. Now, recently in a episode that we had, that featured Travis Bristol from Berkeley and Misha Mosley from the Black Teacher Project. When talking about teachers of color and talking about teacher demographics, one thing that came up was just the reality that just because a teaching candidate is a person of color doesn't necessarily mean that they are any more effective with working with students of color than a teacher candidate that might be white. So I'm wondering, how does your program help prepare your candidates for working with students of color? You mentioned something about having your students think about their own positionality. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that work comes through in a lot of different projects that they complete for the program. We have a whole series, a series of classes that reference communities, and a piece of that is a positionality paper. So who am I, right? So I'll give you an example of a student who said, well, I grew up in this community, but I understand, right? I understand that I left that community to go to college, right? And so when I come back as a person that's been influenced by all these things. How do I come back and still be a good member of this community? And what does it mean to listen really carefully to parents? And how do I connect with community programs and cultural educators in this community again, to bring myself in? And so I think that a lot of the work is that exactly. We've been, this is a harsh word, but I'll use it. We've been indoctrinated, right, into this system of meritocracy. And what I tell students is like, you are the successful, quote, successful ones, right? Because you made it to college. But a lot of it is for them to understand that not everyone had the same experience, that, a whole lot of students were left out of schooling. And how do we start thinking about, well, what was it like, right, for a student who did not feel successful in school and who got pushed out? How do we begin to hear those voices and connect? And a lot of our students, again, come in knowing that coming with that understanding, right, that schools were based on structures that were not meant to uplift communities of color. And so what do we have to do to make change? So I think it's a lot. They do a lot of work meeting with, learning about a community through interviews, through meeting parents, through different opportunities to connect, not just within the school, but the surrounding community of the school.
Yeah, well, that's just beautiful to hear, frankly, that the next generation of teachers who are coming through the campus at UCLA are getting that kind of intentionality around their preparation to meet the needs of the students we know we have in our schools. And hopefully folks out there listening to this can help champion that cause in their own context as well. But I really want to thank our guest today, Emma Hipolito, Director of the Teacher Education Program at UCLA, for joining us. Thank you so much, Emma. We really just enjoyed having you on the show today with us.
Thank you. It was fun. Thank you. It was good talking to both of you.
All right. Next up, folks, is today's Class Dismissed. All right, folks, welcome to today's Class Dismissed. And as always, this is a time in each episode when we like to pause for a moment and reflect and give some props to folks out there in education, just doing some great work, making folks smile, having a big impact, some good news, right? So today's story is about an issue we know that certainly every teenager out there is thinking about, and for sure the parents of those teenagers are thinking about, and every high school in America is thinking about, and that is graduation. And we're right in kind of the midst of the peak of the high school graduation season, and want to give some props to some schools out there doing some interesting and innovative things in this season of COVID. So, Manuel, what do we got today?
Yeah, so Jeff, I teach seniors, and like any teacher who has seniors, they have witnessed the heartbreak that is not having a end to your senior year, a traditional end. So seniors have been stripped of so much, obviously, from prom and senior award ceremonies and all that stuff to graduation and graduation ceremonies specifically. And we want to shout out, for one, the seniors who are doing their best to try to keep their head up and still acknowledge their achievements and their success, even if there is not a big traditional graduation ceremony for them. But also want to shout out the schools out there who are trying anything that they can to creatively have as close to a graduation ceremony as possible. So one high school that stood out to me is Colony High School. Colony High School is in the city of Ontario, which is just outside of Los Angeles. And the first week of May, they had a drive-through graduation ceremony. Now, I know if you're listening to this, you've probably seen stories on social media or on the news about different drive-through ceremonies or cap and gown distributions that different schools are doing. But Colony High School, the first week of May, had this drive-through ceremony where they actually had like the podium set up and the speakers up there and the principal was up there, and each family got to drive up with a certain amount of family members per car, and the seniors showed up in their cap and gown, and their mask that they were wearing had the school logo and said something like Titan Pride or Go Titans on the other side of it. So like they looked fantastic, and they, the on the speakers, the name was announced, and this student got to walk across this makeshift stage and shake the principal's hand. They're all wearing gloves and pose for a very traditional graduation picture. So this to me was really, really creative, being that they did this early. Like, this is the first school that I saw do something like this. This is, again, early May, and this is in California. So at that time, California's like wear a mask in public order was only like, I think, 2 weeks old by then. And they already had school logo printed on their masks, distributed to all the seniors. I don't know if it's maybe a family of one of the students there who has some kind of business where they were able to make these masks for them especially. I don't know, but to be able to do that so quickly, I mean, it looked really, really amazing. Like the cap and gown with all the garb and the mask itself in the school colors with the school logo, name announced on the speakers, got to walk across the stage, get their diploma, pose for a traditional picture with the principal, all with the gloves and the masks and with safety in mind. To me, that was really, really dope. And different schools are doing different things, virtual ceremonies or whatever. But Colony High School, man, shout out to you. I really appreciated seeing that.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I thought it was just a really interesting approach. And, schools across country are doing different virtual things is mostly what I'm seeing. And I get it, right? Like, maybe not every school even has the resources or capacity to do what Colony did. But I think it's great. And, part of what I really liked about seeing the video of their ceremony is I think it preserves a little bit more of the kind of rite of passage aspect of graduation. And, we live in this society that has very few actual rites of passage types of experiences. Like culturally, maybe certain cultures within our society have some of that, but like as a collective, we don't have very many real rites of passage. But high school graduation is one of those things, right? It's like a sort of physical and chronological marking of your transition from childhood to adulthood, right? And marking of your transition from sort of dependent on your parents to more independent, right? And I think that's just such an important developmental milestone for young people, and I have felt so bad for this year's seniors to have worked so hard for so long and then feel like they're going to miss it, right? So it's been amazing to see educators across the country doing so much to preserve what's important about that rite of passage, and definitely what Colony is doing. Like, I respect it and appreciate the precautions they were taking as well. And so, big props to them.
Yeah, for sure. So shout out to all the schools and districts out there trying their best to create some sort of semblance of a traditional graduation ceremony. And shout out to all of you high school seniors for keeping your head up and not letting the current circumstances around COVID-19 dim your pride over the achievements that you have accomplished over all these years. All right. So that about does it for this episode, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, if you've enjoyed what you've seen, go ahead and give us that thumbs up and that subscribe. And if you're listening to the podcast on the go, when you have a moment, please consider rating us and reviewing us. And remember, AOTAshow.com. Dig through the crates. We have so many episodes where we've touched on so many different topics pre-COVID-19, during COVID-19, and there's a lot there for you, all right? So AOTAshow.com, where you will find all of that. All right, so we'll see you next time.